don't know me, I'm your brother. I was raised here in this living hell. You don't know my kind in your world. Fairly soon, time will tell. You are telling me the things you're gonna do for me.
Like everybody. Everybody's gonna need a couple.
I ain't blind and I don't like what I think I see. Taking it to the streets.
Let somebody else out before I let you go.
Taking it to the streets.
Hello again. Welcome to Journey for Service. This is week 6 in the ongoing weekly series of interviews that we have with Lord Randall Earl Kaiser. Randy, welcome back.
Thank you very much, William. It's been a good week. A little quieter. We got some rain here over the weekend, so things kind of settle in when it rains a little bit. And nice and calm, but everything is good.
Excellent. Now, as usual, I like to usually start off our chat to find out what's going on as far as the campaign trail goes. I mean, last week we were happy to hear that you exceeded your 100 mark, 100 autograph mark, and that was fantastic news. Now, I know you haven't, or at least as of last week, you hadn't officially registered yourself yet with those names, but I wanted to find out how the campaign trail has been going. I know that you walk every day, so you're probably constantly meeting people, walking into people and interacting with people, although like you said, it was a little quieter. Just wanted to know how the week went for you.
Yeah, really good, William. We're up, I don't know, I think I'm at 115 or something like that on the autographs, and we only needed 100. So while I continue just walking around and doing my business, like I'll run into people and start a conversation, and if they're interested and I mention the mayoralty thing, then I get another autograph, but it's not a thing now as far as the autographs. We got all that. The only thing we're now on to is putting in the deposit. And I'm going to just say, like we've said before, there's not going to be donations. Okay. I've had people offer already, I said, look, I'll put the money in, you just get going. And I've denied that. I'm not going to take any donations. In fact, what we're here for is to show the ease of monetary creation and the unlimited amount of funding that is available for not only for something like what I'm doing, which is in my mind good for the community, but for good for humanity. And that unlimited funding is flowing as we speak and going to continue to flow and flood, in fact, in the next short time. It's our monetary system on Earth is shifting. We're moving away from this ridiculous notion of debt into the unlimited flow of abundance that's always been there and ready and waiting for this time on Earth to come through.
Now I'm gonna jump in right here, and I'm gonna throw you a curveball. I have heard one, and I'll call it a theory. So if anyone wants to jump on me for calling it a conspiracy theory, have at her. But I'm going to mention it anyway. As you've witnessed in Alberta, and I believe it's probably happening pretty much all across the country, and even in some of the states in the United States, is that there seems to be I don't know if I want to call it a third wave, but another crackdown from the government saying, okay, you know what, we gotta lock you back down again. We got to shut down some of the things that we were allowing you to do before, and things are happening. But I've heard this theory, if you will, that maybe this third lockdown has something to do with the financial reset. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that theory?
Well, William, this whole thing is about money right from day one. We got to a place on this earth where everybody knows that the potential for the USD to go to hell, and drop off the scale and the stock markets to crash, all of that fear mongering was going on in people's minds for the last few years. From 2008, when we had that big crash, everybody said, oh, there's going to be a bubble and there's going to be a pop and all this kind of stuff. So what happened in the last year? Everything just settled right down as far as that monetary talk. And all of a sudden we were able to just manifest out of autographs and agreements, not out of thin air, but out of autographs and agreements, we were able to manifest trillions of dollars to release, to hammer down into the hands of the people. Well, not much of it that ended up there, but into the corporations and into the governments to fix this situation and put us back on track. What? Really? So you're right. This third lockdown, it's not a lockdown, it's like a lock up. They just lock the doors on businesses and stuff like that. I'm not locked down and you're not locked down. We can walk around freely wherever we want to go, but a lot of places you can't get in because they're locked up. You know? But you can't go in a restaurant because it's locked up. You know, it's not locked down. We're not locked down. We're free to move around. But yeah, the thing that's happening right now is fear on the government side, because there's no leadership left. The bad guys, if you want to call them that, the ones that caused this, you know, horrible situation in the first place, they're all gone. And the ones that are left are fearful. They don't want to change their story because otherwise they'll have to change their whole life, you know? Like, oh, wait a minute, it's not a pandemic? Well, then my whole story has to change. My whole life has to change. You know, like, what am I going to do? So these people are frightened as hell, you know, like the political leaders. And what can they do about it? Well, they can try and grasp, cling to the old story and lock them down again. Well, that just helps us some more, helps us to prove the insanity of it even more. Because the only reason that there's been a little bit of a rise, when the sun comes out, when people are getting back outside, guess what caused that rise? People were going in to get the prick in their arm. Do people understand what vaccine really means? Vaccine, in the words of that world, means that you introduce a small bit of that virus into the immune system or into the human so that immune system can fight it off. That is what vaccine means, if you're talking about a vaccine at all, and a bug at all. But in this case, what we're doing is we're introducing it into the arm of people who've been walking around with a diaper on their face, whose immune systems are even failed even more, who've been locked into their old folks' homes and stuff like that, not getting fresh air all winter. Of course, their immune systems are going to be worse. And of course, the introduction of the bug is going to cause a spike in people. And also the fact that there's so much fear driven into the minds of the masses that as soon as they get a little sniffle, they're going to go and get tested. And what's the test going to say? Yep, you have a cold. And that's all it is, or a flu bug. They can't identify it. They've never been able to actually say, this is what COVID-19 looks like. Nobody's been able to show that. And then they show this vaccine in people and zip them up with another little bug of some kind to, you know, basically expel the poisons that are in our bodies. That's what the process of having a flu is. It's just getting rid of the sick cells in our bodies. Sorry, I went on a lot.
That's okay. I'm gonna pull us back because I mean I could go down the conspiracy theory trail till the cows come home, but pardon the pun there, Randy. But
Perfect.
what I think I'll do is I'll rope us and put us back in the corral here of what we were talking about, which is money, which is the theme of this week. We were talking about campaign trail donations. You spoke about donations, that you won't be accepting donations, but you did mention that you do have a source of funding, and that's where all your funding will be coming from. Are you able and willing to speak about that a little bit as far as how that's going for you? Because I understand that that's not in place yet, but is a process that is happening.
Yes, and that's perfect, William, because like I said, part of my purpose being here, in fact, the biggest part of my purpose being here, running for mayor, is to expose the fact that credit and money and funding is unlimited. Okay, there's no limits. So that's one of my main purposes. And the other side of that is that if we're in debt to anybody, tell me who, okay? Because debt is also an illusion. You can't go into negative zero, below zero. It's just impossible. That's just a made up story. So what we've done is we've autographed and authorized a promise, right? Promissory notes of all kinds, building bonds for the government to sell to our own Bank of Canada, which, you know, it's all one pot, but okay, we'll sell you these bonds and then you know, create the money or manifest the money. So it's just such silliness that I don't really know how to respond to people that come at me with the idea of debt. You know, it just doesn't make any sense in my mind anymore after being in the banking industry this long. Yes, there was, sorry, I'll just finish that one up. Yes, there was at one point in time assets like gold and silver and precious metals to back a monetary system in a fractional reserve sense. Okay, so there was a little bit, but then fractional reserve allowed way more, you know. Oh, well, don't worry about how much gold we have. We can just, you know, create more. So the fractional reserve lending, people can look that language up if they want. But in the 1970s, the governments moved completely away from that into manifestation, and manifestation being a key word because it's a manifest. It's a piece of paper with an autograph, the piece of paper being an agreement, okay? I don't like to use the word contract. It's a con job, but it's a contract. But agreement, because I like the terms AG and AU, autograph from an authorized individual being the AU also referring to gold, agreement being silver, AG. So I like to use those terms just to bring that clarity to people's minds, because what I'm talking is very, very simple stuff. It's not economics, it's not inflation and taxes, it's very basic, simple stuff.
I think what is interesting is that, like, here's I'm going to actually share just sort of my opinion on what you're saying, because a lot of times I'll feel like I hear what Randy's saying, but I'm having a hard time getting my mind wrapped around it. And the funny thing is, I think that I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around it because it is simple, and actually I feel like I have to take 15 steps back to be able to properly see it, if you know what I mean. I'll share a little more, and then I want you to correct me or comment on what I'm about to share here. But my understanding, when you're asking the question, who are we in debt to? Well, I would say that the government is in debt to the central bank. But my understanding, or from my background in education around that whole subject, is that the central bank isn't owned by the government, but it's owned by elite corporations that are run by people who have a heck of a lot of money that basically control the central banks around the world. So in a sense, I see it as we're in debt to them because of the arrangements our governments made with the central banks. Am I off on that, or is that actually just a slightly different way of saying what you've been saying?
That's the story. Okay, that is the story that they'll come back to you and say, we're in debt to these elite people that hold assets, okay, in the form of paper money. Again, it's not, they're not talking about any gold or anything. It's just they have this money, you know. Well, where did they get it? Like, how did it get created into their hands? It always comes back to the people. And when people understand the process of creating bonds in Canada and many of the other nations, in the United States, it's called a medium-term note. So medium-term note being a bond, Euro bond is what they use in the European Union. Those bonds are based on the people. Okay, so then in Canada, the government of Canada sells bonds, but where'd they get the bonds? They got the bonds from us, the trust, the agreement, the authorization. They got that from the people. Then they sell that to the Bank of Canada. The Bank of Canada creates the money because they don't borrow it from their organization that they're working with. They just create it. They just manifest it. And if, because it's no other way. They're not taking it from somebody that has something,
Yeah. Now, the other thing I'm going to add to that too, and I think you'll be able to speak to this too, is that, and I remember hearing it in an interview this week. I think it might have been on the Charlie Ward show or something, but it was mentioned that if you actually look at a dollar bill, or well, in our case, it'd be a $5 bill because we don't have a dollar bill anymore. There's somewhere on there, there's writing that this is a promise to pay. So it's, and that's, in other words, it's a promissory note. So when we hear the word fiat money, it, in a sense, that piece of paper is just a piece of paper that says, I actually owe money to somebody, the way I understand it. And this is just a representation of that. Or in this case, I guess maybe the government would owe, the $5 on the $5 bill that I'm now spending on whatever coffee or whatever I'm spending it on. Is that kind of accurate too? The dollars are actually not real money. They're fiat money, but they're in essence mini promissory notes in a way, aren't they?
Yeah, for sure. And that's what it's all about, is promises, right? Promises to, like, when you go in and get a mortgage for your house or whatever, you give them your promise first. And then the money credit comes back and comes to you. So where did they get that from? They used your promise to get it from somebody else. And if they say that, if they want to simplify it and say that, admit that they used your promise to get it from somebody else, well, where'd that somebody else get it from? You see, it's all just a flip over of the reality of what's going on here. Your autograph is actually the creditor. That's what creates the money. It's not the other way around. And I proved it myself by going into the bank after my foreclosure and all my losses. I went in and said, I want my autographed paper back. I want that back. And they can't supply it. Well, what'd you do with it? Are you kidding me? Like, did you give it to somebody and they gave you money? If that's the case, then I want to see the trail. I want to see the paper trail.
Right. I remember you were saying also that they were continually willing to offer you a copy of the original with your signature on it, but that's not what you were asking for.
No, because it's that authentic autograph, AU, again, authentic, right? That's the value. It's just like artwork when you think of it, like you can get a copy of artwork all day long, but where's the original? That's got the value. That's the thing that has the value, right?
Yeah.
It's the whole thing. And in this case, it's the whole thing. It's my promise to pay you back. That's how you were able to get money. And at the government level, it's the same, except they're using bonds. So the bonds are created from these numerous birth certificates that they have, and then they create one bond, sell that bond to their own Bank of Canada, which we actually in Canada, the people own that too. It's just such silliness. And I try my best to simplify it, and it's hard for us all because we've been so programmed, right? And it's just like everything else. Let's compare it to COVID, because we're going to talk about that as well. Because after a whole year now of doctors supporting this, supporting this idea and saying, yep, it's a virus and we got to create a vaccine and all this kind of stuff. Now there's dozens of doctors coming out after a whole year and saying, wait a minute, the numbers aren't adding up, like they're this. And so it took that long for these highly intelligent, educated human beings in that intelligentsia, in that group of people, to actually say, just wait a minute here, this isn't adding up. So, and then once you find out, do you want to be embarrassed enough to admit it, that you screwed up? Not very many people want to do that either, because our egos want to fight for survival, for us to be right about something. So it's a convoluted situation, but the simplicity of it is, William, is that debt does not exist, and that we are actually the creditors of funding and money. So again, you know, going back to the donations just for a second and saying that I'm here to prove that funding is unlimited, okay? If I don't get the funding for this mayoralty race, I won't be in it. But I'm going to prove to you that it works that way because it's coming from the unlimited funding that's available in both asset-backed accounts that used to hold, you know, more gold and silver than anybody can imagine. And, you know, most people don't want to even admit that that exists, but it does. We've been mining gold and silver for thousands of years. So there's oodles of it that's not in the system even, you know, and oodles of it that's in these off-ledger accounts held by the banking structure and now just going to start pouring in, right? So I'm going to prove that by this campaign and show people that, no, keep your money in your pocket, do what you need to do with that, and I'll look after what I'm doing on my own. It's fine, because the funding is coming through this system that I believe in, that I know exists, and I'm going to show it to you.
Perfect. We could go again on many different tangents there. I mean, we could go down the trail of the birth certificates and how we kind of gave up our I won't say our freedoms, but our right to be able to be the creditor and be in that powerful position of being able to, you know, write and be the creditor, the person that actually writes the autograph that creates the money. So that's one thing. But I want to step further back in time. I want to, I think we may have alluded to it a little bit in one of our first shows, but I think it's time to revisit it and maybe go a little deeper. And that's the history of this for you personally. How did you become aware of all this stuff that you're sharing with us now around the banking? I believe it started when you were, you know, can I call you a cattle rancher? Is that actually an accurate term, or is it more like a beef raiser? Or is there a different name that I can use for that?
You can call me whatever you want, as long as you don't call me late for a ribeye steak.
All right. Well, how did that start? Did it start from there? Or actually, did you know some even while you were, you know, a rancher?
Not really. Like, you know, I'll try and sum it up pretty quick. We're actually writing a book about this because it is a fairly long story, but the summation is that I lived in that world of capitalism, speculating on land and you know, buying and selling cattle and beef and raising beef and all that kind of stuff. And then I wanted to kick that up and get into the big business, you know, because we had created a nice little value chain where we were taking our beef right through to retail. And I said, hey, if this works, we can do it on a big scale. Why would we let, you know, the big multinational corporations just keep doing that when we can do it ourselves? Like, so I got into that. And at that time, I was still thinking in terms of investment money, right? My mind hadn't gotten into this idea of unlimited resources when it comes to credit and money yet. I was thinking in terms of investors. So I got into that world. And then when I lost my assets based on taking chances in that world and being denied by banks in that world to access credit, and been, you know, failing in our achievements to get the investment we needed, then I questioned, first off, the idea of where my autographed paper was. Like I said, took a document into the bank after the foreclosure of my property with specific written words that I want my wet ink signed original contract back. And when they couldn't give me that, and I knew they couldn't, it just sunk into my brain completely. That document had the value. That promise was what allowed them to create the credit, okay? Or manifest the credit. It's all about paper, so manifest.
What precipitated the reason for you asking for the original in the first place?
Well, I started to, you know, look into the birth certificate bond and the idea of common law pure trusts and common law jurisdiction. I was just exploring it at that time, you know, and I wanted to get in a little deeper. So I just dove right into it myself with my own experience of saying the autograph and the authentic authorization are very important here for some reason, and the agreement. So AU and AG. And I started to think in terms of that, right?
Yep.
So, yeah, so then from there, it was, I just asked one of these banking family members who I was dealing with on the Commonwealth Pure Trust some questions about banking. And he said to me, because he took me seriously and he thought I was, wanting to know more, he said, well, would you like to get into the business? And I said, by all means, let's do it. So I absorbed over the next 8 or 9 months the whole theory of sovereign money creation, of autographs and agreements, and the fact that an MT-103 standalone credit instrument is how credit is created, bank to bank, without anything but agreement between the two banks. There's nothing to back it. When he first said that to me, I said, well, your family's money, is that what backs it? Like you're involved with these banking families, which he was. He's a Bauer, okay, at the Barclays banking, highest bank in the off-ledger accounts and one of the top 100 banks in the orthodox on-ledger accounts, okay? So there's non-orthodox being off-ledger accounts, orthodox being on-ledger accounts, two different banking structures, one that holds them assets away from the economy, one that fluctuates the assets in the economy. And his family runs and manages Barclays Bank in both of those two things. So this man, all the intelligence I ever needed was in his brain. So over time, he fed it to me and offered it to me. And I said, so then this message, this MT-103 Swift message is what it's called, has nothing to back it but the agreement and the autograph of the people. And he said, human energy. So again, it's the promise, right? It's the autograph, it's the authority, it's the authorization, it's the authenticity. That's all it's about. And then that standalone credit instrument goes into the bank. And from that standalone instrument, you bring in secondary banking. Okay, this is primary banking that creates credit from the authentic authorized agreement. Secondary banking is when they bring in the idea of debt and either suck somebody into, promising that they'll pay it back, or just simply saying that it's debt, which is what they do at that level, is just say that it's debt.
Now, are you saying that secondary thing where we get convinced that it's debt, that world is going away or transforming?
It's going to transform over time, William, because the minds of the people will hang on to it. Like there's still going to be people out there that are going to adhere to that system until we transform the rest of this, okay? And that transformation is twofold. It's number one, unlimited resources, unlimited funding coming from off-ledger accounts that have been held off-ledger, right? Because they're so large that they can change the economy of the world, let alone a nation. So those accounts are slowly starting to come in. And we're going to see that in the next few weeks. It's starting to creep in right now. And there always was the potential for some of that to creep in, but the central bank system that brings in that narrow little hourglass of how much comes in, that is still going to be there, but we're going to see it widen out, and that'll take a little time.
Now, something's just hitting me here, and I'm going, does this mean that once we start that transition, does this mean, as an example, let's say I want to build a big, huge gymnasium where all the people in, Capilano City want to play volleyball, and they're adults and they want to play co-ed, which is a thing I love to do and love to see happen. And so I don't have the funds to be able to go and buy that, but are you saying that I would be able to eventually be able to create that credit with my signature to be able to generate and create the funds that way? And then be able to purchase the property and the land and all the rest of the things that are involved with building that. Is that how it would work, or is it a little bit more than that?
Yeah, it's more than that. Like we're kind of mixing the two stories there, with the credit creation and the autograph being the way that it's done for the public purse, right? For the government.
Mhm.
Okay, so for me to just create that with an autograph, that's not going to work. So for now, there's the off ledger asset backed accounts. If you run into somebody that's connected to that, which there's going to be more and more of them coming out, and they agree that your project is something that they'd like to fund, okay, not finance, but fund, then that has potential to happen. But on the other side of credit creation, that was saved for these authorized, authentic bankers, sovereign. They were operating outside of the realm of the legal jurisdiction, but that authority to create with their autograph was limited to them, right? So that's where the whole structure of the agenda that was going on. And don't get me wrong, I'm not talking conspiracy theory here. I'm not talking, bad guys or anything. It's just the way the system was set up, okay? It's that simple. It was set up to monitor or to limit the flow and not just allow everything to be wide open. So is that completely wrong? I'd say not. There was certain amount of organization in that process and in that situation. Where they really went off base was as a public organization, a government, if you want to call it that, your duty is to the people, because they're the ones that are giving you their authority, whether it's deceptive or not. Like I said today in one conversation, it started deceptively, but now there's so many people realize what it's, that autograph is what's creating the credit at the public government level, and not just at that level, but at the mortgage level too. Like, it crept into the banking system as well as the public system, but that knowledge now is so wide known that they can't turn it around again. But the challenge is, if you want to keep it, then keep it, but keep it in a place where you're treating those creditors, those people that give you that bond, that give you that authority and that authorization and that agreement. Treat them with their comfort. Give them their comfort, okay? Doesn't mean you have to open the floodgates and give everybody $1 billion. Like, there's so many people out there that I know, and I don't run them down for it, but they're going after that trust. As soon as they know that it exists, then they want their $1 billion or their $1 million or their $500,000 or whatever they can get. That's not what this is about in my mind. This is about exposing that truth and then saying, okay, if we're going to do that in the public sector, then let's do it. And I'll authorize you to do it. And the first thing we need to do is look after the comfort of every one of these beautiful human creditors, these creators that are giving you the authority to do that. So, that's my simplicity on that side. Then we can go, okay, go ahead.
I'm gonna give you a chance to catch your
Sure.
breath for a second. That's a big subject, that's for sure. And thank you for clarifying that for me, because I'm hoping I wasn't the only one who was thinking what I was saying there as an example. You said something interesting right at the end there, and I follow a gentleman who is he's based offshore, but he has a radio type show online, and it's about sovereignty. And interestingly enough, it's about creating your own trusts to protect your assets and put you in a situation where you don't own anything, because your trusts will own everything. He said something interesting in his show this week, which was almost in direct opposition to what you just said. Now, I'm not doing this to create animosity or anything, but
That's okay.
but I'm just interested to hear what you might say to that. And what he said was, as you know, with the Great Reset that has been spoken, and people like the Klaus Schwabs of the world and that kind of thing, they were saying things like everyone will get a standard income. They'll get a basic income, but they won't own anything, and so on. And this gentleman, who I won't name because I don't really want to put him on the spot or anything, but he basically said on his show that he doesn't agree with the concept of giving people a basic income, because he feels that would be that would create sort of he didn't use the word laziness, but that's sort of what was generated from there. Sort of people would lose their drive and their motivation to do anything. And like, I'm sort of on the fence between the two. I don't know which way it would go. I would imagine there will be some individuals who have a comfort income who, at least for a while, will probably just sit on their laurels and do nothing. But there's also the other side of it, which I know that you're more seeing as what you imagine would happen. Can you speak to that a little bit more as to why you think a comfort income or a basic type of income would, without strings attached, would be a benefit to all the individuals who will be receiving it?
Yeah, well, exactly, William. And that fellow is still, programmed into thinking that the capitalism and communism thing, right? Socialism, we'll call it, instead of communism if you want. But it's, that's the mindset that's been driven into our minds for our lifetime, right? Guaranteed. And maybe the generation before us as well. But the idea is there. And I'm going to mention it again, as I have near every video, that John Kenneth Galbraith, one of my favorite advisors to John F. Kennedy, when he was president of the United States, said, and I'll quote, "Under communism, man exploits man. Under capitalism, it's the exact opposite. In other words, exactly the same." So as far as worrying about whether or not the human being with his comfort income is going to be lazy, tell me what's going on right now. Like, we've got, the unemployment figures that were fed out of the, the government are so full of shit. It's not even funny. There's so many people that are just dependent on income credit through the government. I'm not going to say from, because it's not from the government. They're the creditors in the first place, like I said. And if we can't get everybody to agree on that, well then fine, you can just continue to live in that other world. Like, it's not as if we're here to destroy anything. We're here to show the unlimited potential of both asset-backed funding and the unlimited potential that we know exists as bankers of sovereign money creation. The only thing was they were limiting it themselves and putting it into globalist corporation projects, which were, in their mind, humanitarian in nature. So, that's where, again, I'll say, can you blame them? They had a plan. There was a plan, it was to feed humanity and a, globalist agenda, all that kind of stuff. It just got so ridden with criminals and so ridden with, greedy scum that, it didn't work. So, we can reset it, and we can reset it in either the capitalist manner, like this fellow's talking about, and, making everybody go to work. Well, why does everybody have to go to work? And we have, people retiring at 50, 55, and people living till they're into their 80s. Like, the majority of the population doesn't work, William. That's a fact. And in Canada alone, 40% of the workforce works directly with the government. And of the rest of us, the other 60% that have been working, or I'm not working right now, but when I was working, the other 60% dependent on some kind of a contract from the government. So it's all government. It's grown so huge. And then the criminals infiltrated it and got in there and just, robbing and stealing like you wouldn't believe. But that's what's shifting, is that as well as just coming out with truth as to how the monetary system works and how it is completely unlimited. We not only create the credit or the money, but we create the value of the credit and the money too, so it's all just a creation scheme that humans have come up with.
You mentioned earlier on that I wanted to go back to briefly is, around the way money had been moving, at least in the existing system that we are appearing to be transitioning out of now. But that was the way I pictured it when you were describing it, how banks were taking money from one place to be able to give you the money for a mortgage so that you could buy your home or whatever large purchase you wanted to make that required, borrowing from the bank in the first place, or at least so-called borrowing from the bank, just to clarify that part. But I saw it as a kind of a shell game. It's like the money's under one shell and the banks were the ones that were kind of moving the shells around, saying, okay, where are we moving the shells? Follow the shell. Let's see where the shell ends up. And it was very much a shell game. But I'm starting to think now too, it's kind of illusory in a way. There's the picture of that looks different from what we've been taught and told versus how it really kind of happens. And another area where I think things are different than how we've been taught and told is taxation. Now, how would municipal taxes and taxation be different under your watch if you were elected mayor, or when you're elected mayor, as you like to say? How would that change in the scope of what we've been talking about and the ability to do the money creation?
Well, in the meantime, let's put it this way. The changes that I'm talking about are very slim chance that they're going to happen overnight, right? So the transitional phase, I would suggest that me as the mayor, I'm not going to be able to say, okay, no more taxes, just stop that. We'll just create the money we need because we have the capability to do that. That's going to not really ring over too well with the rest of the councillors and the people, and this, it's just not going to work. So there's going to be some kind of a transition. But taxation is one of my favorite topics because it is so silly to think of that people think that is what is paying for our infrastructure and the thousands, millions of government employees and all of the things that government does, that it's all coming from taxation.
Wait a minute, you mean it's not?
It doesn't even dribble in, like it's such a small amount, when you get to a city and you start to say, okay, they pay $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 a year for each of their homes, that amounts to quite a bit of money. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but show me the budget is what I want to ask people. Show me the whole budget, because when you get into budgets at that level, nobody can think in those kind of terms of numbers. A good example is me going into a management position with our large retailer, okay? And this is a grocery store, right?
Yeah.
So I've said before that once you get into that group, like the developers or these multinational globalist agenda projects like grocery stores and stuff like that you don't pay any interest, you just, operate on a credit line and you never pay anything back. And that became so relevant to me when, as a manager, I saw the books on I was in one very large one and one lesser large retail grocery chain. And both of them were complete, utter nonsense. Like, it was just, are you kidding me? We lost that much money last year in the store and we're still able to survive? Like, what's going on here? So you see my questions and my experience in the world of business and in the world of banking now show me that there's just nobody out there that wants to sit down and think about these little simple things, like how in the hell a grocery store can keep going when it's, showing losses of $1 million in one store. It was 1.6 million, in fact. I'll tell you the number. It was 1.6 million in losses. And that store had been open for about 5 years. It's still going, but I guarantee you they haven't got any profits yet. So, you know, tell me that doesn't happen with the corporate government of Canada. It's just a shell game, like you say, telling stories about budgets and then, oh, we had to borrow 300 billion. Well, I think you had to make that 300 billion. You had to create that 300 billion in your shell game, number one. And is that really the number? Is that really the number? Are you giving us the right numbers here? You know, like, question it. That's what we have to do. But that's all in the past. Like I say, I don't think anybody has to go through that process that I went through to prove it to myself, and then to get it backed up by the upper levels of Bank of Montreal, where I deal with capital wealth management. Capital wealth management. That just tells you they're managing the wealth, right? And then private wealth management just down below, which is where I function in. What? You know, when I go and sit with them and I talk the same way as I'm talking to you, they agree with me. So why don't the people agree with me? You know, why don't the people say, well, money's just, you know, created. It's just manifested. Some of them do. Some of them get to that stage, but then it's like, yeah, but I got to go to my job now. Look, we got to get back at this because there's no time.
Well, we haven't quite adopted it into real theory in the, you know, at the levels that we live at, a lot of us, I'm sure. Randy, we don't have a ton of time left, but we did mention something last week that is tied into, you know, what we've been talking about today. I don't fully understand it, but you alluded to it, and I wanted to give you a chance to speak to it in a little bit more, you know, given a little more time. So you were talking about something called modern monetary theory. And can you explain, first of all, what that is, and how does that relate to what we've been talking about so far today?
Yeah, in a nutshell, what that is the creation of money at the central bank level, right? Or manifestation of money or credit at the central bank level. And that doesn't include getting it from somewhere, right? It's based on the shell game. It's based on the autographs and agreements and the bonds and the movement of paper back and forth. So that is the beginning of that. And in our modern history, the last 15, 20 or more years, you'll hear the term quantitative easing or central bank easing. Okay, QE.
QE, heard of that.
And yes, and quantitative easing is basically that process of selling bonds to your central bank. So in the US, it's selling medium-term notes to the Federal Reserve. In Canada, it's selling Canada's bonds to the Bank of Canada. So that's the first step, right? But it's still just creation. It's not, there's nothing to back it. There's no gold, there's no silver, there's nothing to back it. The banking families and the story of them, the Crown Corporation, well, it's just a corporation. That's what our government is the lower end of that corporation, creating, manifesting the credit. So then from there, we talk about taxation and inflation in the modern monetary theory. That's where taxation and inflation come in. So they'll say, if we create too much, if we pump a bunch of money into the economy, and now they've decided to do it just strictly with governments, you know, like, well, don't worry about it. We'll create infrastructure and more jobs, and spin-off jobs from that other 60% that depend on this infrastructure project, right? So all of that comes into play on the side of an economist looking at this and saying, okay, well, how are we going to balance that inflation then? Because when that money gets released that we've just created, how are we going to balance it? Well, then we bring in taxation. And then they tax the money so that the inflation stays down. That's modern monetary theory in a heartbeat. So you have two tools. After you create the credit, you have two tools: inflation and taxation, to keep people thinking in duality mentality, off balance, thinking, oh, what are we going to do now? everything's going up in price. Well, we'll tax it, and then, you know, it'll bring it back down. It's just insanity. But that's a nutshell.
It's kind of like it sounds like it's a governing kind of thing where you were talking earlier about, you know, the two sides, the secondary banking and the banking that most of us work in, you know, in our daily lives. And you know, there's the sort of the rise and fall of what happens. But you said that it was intentionally created to keep it in a narrow window, for so to speak. So it never got too crazy high or never too crazy low. So the people were I kind of see it like an hourglass almost, like it just goes up and down. The sand moves up and down, and they use, the way I'm perceiving what you're saying, is they're using taxation and inflation to do the movement of up or down, and always kind of balancing it, bringing it back. Then it goes too far the other way. Then they have to bring it back using the other tool. And am I kind of getting the gist of this?
Yeah, pretty much. And, you know, the other words they'll use are recession and depression.
Ooh.
You know, like add those words into there, bring a whole bunch of words in so that it makes it complex and people get all thrown off. And then what happens is that when people get to the stage of realizing it, like where I'm talking, most of the time then we get into protest mode. Well, I want then, you know, or I want, you know, and that's where the conspiracy theories and everything else come into effect, because it just keeps us fighting with each other. And what does that do? It just promotes it. It keeps it going then, because nobody's coming up with a solution.
Mm-hmm.
There's no solution. It's just fight it, or I'm going to govern the government, or I'm going to get my money now that I know that it's available. If, like I say, I've run into so many people in that realm, you know, from Heather Giraffe Tucci, who's in jail still, and, you know, numerous others who have got it figured out. The government has been creating the money, so now we can find a way to access it. And I don't run them down. They're doing their part in this and exposing the truth. But it's like, okay, let's simplify it. That's why I joke around about it. I want it to be simple so that we can laugh about it, laugh at ourselves, and then get back on track, you know, because we contributed to it.
You've said before, Randy, that in past videos on your channel that you know, that we all know that, well, we don't all know, but a lot of us who are sort of more toward the critical thinking recognize that a lot of the stuff we see on like mainstream media, that kind of thing, a lot of it actually is propaganda. But you've also said that if you look at the other side of the spectrum, the people that may be labeled as conspiracy theorists also have propaganda to the opposite extreme. And so I'm starting to see your logic. I mean, even you said the same thing with regards to, you know, running in a political campaign. Why should I make somebody else wrong and fire them down and create arguments and antagonism and all that kind of stuff? That person contributed something to the process and took us in a certain direction. Some of it helped, some of it maybe not so much. But then there's the other side of it, and there's the other person that's arguing for the opposite side. They're, like you say, they're bringing new light to different people on this. But what I'm seeing you doing is you're taking very much the neutral ground, the middle ground, and you're saying, I see both sides of this. Those two are pretty extreme. What I'm saying is we can utilize all of that, but come to a more sensible middle ground. Am I barking up the right tree with that observation?
Well, I think that way. Like, I think in terms of polarity rather than bipolar, you know, like it's when you get to that polarity and take out the extremes, then the common sense and the logic, the logos, comes into your mind. And the logos behind it is such simple things like that every other animal, as much as we think we're gods and all this stuff, you know, like that we're so special compared to every other animal on earth. What other animal on earth goes into debt for its home, you know, for its food? Not one. So bring yourself back into that space of being a human to start with, being a mammal, you know, and then tell the people on either side of this bipolar, bipartisan, left wing, right wing bird, that, wait a minute, you're a bird first, you know, you're a bird. You got a body here that needs to be looked after. The wings and the flying and all that stuff and left and right and everything can come after. But remember that you're just an animal, and that every other animal in your species, every other human being deserves the same comfort as you, okay? Whether you're a communist or a capitalist or whatever. And that's where humanity comes in, and you say, how can we create all of this stuff we've created on this beautiful, wonderful planet, this stunning city, and yet we still can't create enough to give the comfort to each human being in some little home, or, you know, at least their rent paid, you know, like it just doesn't make sense to me. But that's the capitalist approach that's been driven into the Western world for so long. And I'm not saying it's better than communism. I'm just saying, let's get back to the center here. Bring some common sense in and say, you know, those people that fella said, well, they'll be lazy. Maybe they won't be lazy. Maybe they'll get creative when they realize that they don't have to be striving and concerning themselves, whether they're, you know, after their parents for a few extra bucks, which most capitalists will say, those lazy kids, you know. Well, if they had their comfort, then you wouldn't have to look after them, would you? You know, like it's so simple to me, but anyway, that's where I go.
That's awesome. Randy, thank you so much for your time today. I think it's time that we wrap it up for this week. Are there any final words you'd like to mention about anything we've talked about today?
Yeah, just settle down, you know, bring it inside, you know, like all of us have to think of this from a individual standpoint, you know, not listen to one side or the other, you know, whether it be the alternative media or the mainstream media or any media at all for a while. Just settle yourselves and just think in terms of the God within you, that goodness within you. What is good for you and good for everyone and everything every day? And in my mind, if you come out and say, well, I deserve, because I worked, my home, but that guy that didn't work doesn't deserve his home, well, then you got to go back and think inside a little bit more, because thinking inside will tell you that every one of us is born equal. We're born the same. And then we get into these, start to move around and move one direction or the other, you know? And that's something that I feel as if this year has given us a good opportunity to settle in and think inside and bring common sense to this whole idea of government or control from the outer, where we can be sovereign and think in sovereign states and be sovereign states ourselves and trust only ourselves, because trust and reliance come down to one word, versus believing. We can believe whatever we want, but trust yourself. Don't trust a governed mind, you know? It's just not, it's obvious this year that they've deceived us through this whole propaganda campaign. It's the biggest deception that we've ever had, bigger than 9/11, bigger than the beginning of the world wars. This is the biggest deception worldwide that we've ever witnessed. And people are seeing that now and saying, shall I trust the government for anything, for numbers, for budgets, for debt, for, you know? And I'm not saying stand up against them and protest. I'm saying infiltrate it and stand up and lead it, you know, get in there and do it yourself. Get into the government. If you think you've got answers, get in there yourself.
Lord Randall, thank you very much. Would you please conclude our meeting today with one of your marvelous closing blessings?
Thank you, William. And I love that. With peace, harmony, love, abundance, and freedom for everyone and everything every day on our minds. I know William and I agree on that one. And a lot of other things that we are in agreement on. And I am in agreement with William on. And abundance, sovereignty, health, love, and euphoria. Have some fun this week, guys. Love you.
Bye.